Testing, testing. Mayor Phillips, we can go live.
Good evening. We welcome you to the Santa Fe City Council meeting of Monday, April 20th, 2020. And I'll request a roll call by City Clerk.
Councilmember Bushy.
Present.
Vice Mayor Collin.
Present.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Present.
Councilmember McCullough.
Here.
Mayor Phillips.
Present and all accounted for. This meeting is being streamed live to you, YouTube, and to our website, and you can have community members attending via conference call with the following telephone number: 669-900-9128. And the meeting ID number is 994-4592-2706 #. The City Council met in closed session prior to this open, and I'll ask the City Attorney if there are any matters to report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No reportable action was taken in closed session.
Thank you very much. I'll invite the City Clerk to address how public comment will work this evening.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're accepting public comments over the telephone and through YouTube live chat. If you are participating by telephone and wish to provide public comments, please press *9 when the mayor opens the public comment period. Once you've pressed *9, wait until you hear a notification that you've been unmuted. Then you'll be able to speak for 2 minutes. If you are submitting public comments in the live chat, please submit your comments by writing public comment in all caps, introduce yourself, and let us know what item on the agenda you're speaking for. If you submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, it has been forwarded to the City Council and published to our website, unless it was within the last hour, which I will be reading out loud into the record.
Thank you very much. We'll start with the open consent items. That is items 4A through 4C. Do any council members wish to have any of the 3 items held? I'll start with Councilmember Bushy.
No.
Vice Mayor Collin.
No.
Councilmember Gamblin.
No.
Councilmember McCullough.
No.
And I don't others, therefore we'll ask for public expression if there is any.
If you are participating by telephone and you wish to speak on an item on the consent calendar, please press *9. And while I wait for participants to press *9, I will also request for public comments to be submitted through YouTube. And I'm just going to wait 1 second for the callers. There are no comments through the YouTube live chat, and there are no callers who wish to speak on a consent calendar item.
Thank you. In which case, do I have a motion with regard to the consent calendar items?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
And second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, and the matter carries 5-0. We'll turn to the City Manager's report. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to give a brief update on the city's efforts regarding the coronavirus response for my report tonight. We're beginning our 6-week operating the city's Emergency Operations Center, which is also known as an EOC, where the city morphs into a disaster response organization in addition to maintaining certain ongoing functions. I just wanted to give you a few minutes of kind of some highlights of what's going on recently. The first one is that today's information from Marin County Public Health is that we have 199 tested positive coronavirus cases, 37 hospitalizations total, with 3 currently in the hospital, and 10 fatalities. The county EOC, as you know, has been suggesting the total positive cases is much higher, but the results totals are limited by the number of tests that are occurring. One thing that just happened at the very end of last week is a new county health public health order came out on new face coverings, which is going to go into effect on noon of this Wednesday, April 22nd this week, where face coverings are going to be mandatory for public settings where people will come into contact within 6 feet of others that they don't live with, particularly indoors. So this is, for most people, what this means is that when you're either walking around your essential business or you're going to a restaurant or something like that to pick up food, or you're going into the grocery store, that you're wearing this kind of like cloth mask or something like this. Not necessary to be an N95 or a surgeon's mask, but more something like this. Also made one just cutting out of a t-shirt is something that you could do as well, or a bandana or a neck gaiter, that sort of thing. So that's going to be mandatory starting on Wednesday at noon. And as a quick aside, the city has been requesting donations of those so that we can make sure we distribute those to the most vulnerable populations that maybe don't have access to them. And we have a creative use of our book drops at the library, the downtown library, the Alboro Community Center, the Pickleweed Library there, and then the Terra Linda Community Center. There's a book drop there as well that we've added for this purpose. So if the community has extra cloth face masks or in the process of making them right now, those book drops are a great place to donate them, and then you'll know they'll get put to good use. Probably the biggest news that seems to be coming is modifications to the shelter order, which is in the works. This again is going to be a collaboration with the Bay Area County Health Officers. So as you know, our current order goes through May 3rd, and the county EOC and the county health officer has been open to receiving input on what sorts of things that the community thinks should go into the next order. And I want to thank the council members who have mailed me or emailed me suggestions to pass along to the county. I know they are receiving a lot of suggestions. And we heard today that the county health has a goal of getting an updated order out a week prior to when the current one expires. And that expires on May 3rd. So we should see a new order coming out on or around April 26th, a little over a week from now, or actually a little less than a week from now, with the idea that about a week before the expiration date happens, we'll have new information on what would be in a new updated county health officer. And I think the overall goal of county health, working with all of their counterparts in other Bay Area counties, is to try to increase the allowable activities, but in a way that manages risk at the same time, while not causing harm. So I would suspect that we'll see some opening of things that are not allowed under the current shelter-in-place order, but with a lot more detail of how that needs to be done and how that could be carried out, and then maybe not opening up in some other areas that are higher risk communities. So we'll wait and see what that looks like, and we expect to see that again on or around April 26th. The County Emergency Operations Center continues to work with clustered communities like skilled nursing, assisted living, or other large facilities with close quarters. We have San Quentin near us, to assist them with infection control practices to prevent outbreaks. So this is an area that I think when I talk about the new shelter order and maybe some areas where we won't see as much opening up or loosening of the restrictions, it might be in these kind of areas for sure where the risk is higher. We continue to work on working with our partners in the county and others to look at alternative care sites so that hospitals are not overwhelmed if we do see this kind of surge. A few other things from our Emergency Operations Center. Vice Mayor Collin has created a digital toolkit for a new neighbor-to-neighbor program, and it's being shared right now with neighborhood leaders, which empowers each of them to connect with their neighbors. And the idea is that each neighbor connecting with other neighbors is going to go a lot further than just what we can do as a city getting out information, or even what social service organizations can do. So we're trying to harness the neighbors' ability to help each other during this period of time, which I think is being very well received by our community. We had on Friday, we released a new message from the mayor, video conversation with some special guests of the mayor. And the focus was the small business grant program. And just as a reminder, the application period closed today at 5 p.m. So we are now closed for this period. We got about 280 completed applications, which definitely exceeds the amount of funding that we currently have donated, with the idea that the grants, the micro grants, would be $5,000. And we'll need to make a determination, working with our partners, the San Rafael Chamber of Commerce and others, of whether that it's that amount for everyone, or there's smaller amounts for certain businesses and things like that. So now that the application period is closed, those conversations can happen, and the committee can go through the applications and start making awards. I did want to add, though, since we've got community listening, and this will be available online afterwards, that if you do the math, 280 completed applications and the amount that you've heard that we have fundraised so far, which is in the range of $175,000 to $200,000, isn't enough. So I've heard that the San Rafael Chamber is working on an online donation site, but right now, if anyone wanted to assist our local businesses in a bigger way than ordering takeout or going to essential businesses, it would be to donate to this cause, which is directly going to San Rafael small businesses. And the way to do that, until such time that there's an online donation site set up, is to cut a check to the San Rafael Chamber Educational Foundation, and that's located at the Chamber's location, which is 817 Mission Avenue. So you could call the city or the Chamber if you want additional information and get the nonprofit tax ID number and that sort of thing. But we're hopeful that we'll see some additional donations coming in, because the more we can receive in donations, the more of the small business grants we can provide. A couple other really quick things: the mayor and council and staff continue to work with our state and federal legislative representatives through weekly calls and also letters in an attempt to lessen the impact on the significant revenue losses that we're expecting by seeing particularly sales tax revenue decreasing, and the impact on our budget and corresponding reduction in services. We're also working with the County of Marin and the City of Novato on the additional allocation for CDBG funds, or Community Development Block Grant funds. And we expect to have a recommendation for you at your next City Council meeting. So there's plenty more that's going on in the EOC around expanding Wi-Fi access, continuing emergency childcare, and those sorts of things. I think I'll just focus on a couple more small things and then turn it back to you, Mayor. One is that we're continuing to publish community messaging. Hopefully our community and our neighborhoods are seeing the San Rafael is Resilient logo and the messaging that we're sending out about 3 times a week. And also we're sending out the city manager's snapshot e-newsletter before every city council meeting. We did a complete overhaul, thanks largely to our digital staff and our public information officers, of our coronavirus related information on our website, which now feels like a whole new website on its own, with the amount of information that's in there. So that's cityofsanrafael.org/coronavirus. I also wanted to mention that Councilmember Bushy has been working with the people doing the data and the surveillance at the county EOC website on improving the graphs to better tell the story of what's going on in Marin County. So I appreciate the council members' work on that. And when you go to coronavirus.marinhhs.org, first of all, there's a FAQ that answers almost every imaginable question, but also now the surveillance aspect of it and the data is improving all the time as well. So I would just ask the community to stay tuned to cityofsanrafael.org/coronavirus and the e-newsletters that we're sending out. We're also active on social media to stay tuned of what's going on at the city and the different things that we're providing from a city service standpoint. So Mayor, that concludes my report, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, first of all, thanks so much what you've done, and obviously all our staff. It's a busy time and it's unconventional in many ways. So you've been bobbing and weaving, and we certainly as a community, appreciate the effort of everyone involved in this most trying and difficult period for all of us. Just if you could, one quick question on the number of tests. The tests are a big deal, and you mentioned that there are 199 that have been identified as positive. How many tests have there been in Marin County? One time it was like 2,400, but has that changed much? You know?
Off mute here. There are 2,818 of people that have been tested for COVID-19 in Marin County.
Okay, which is only about 1%, just a hair over 1%. You mentioned the message we broadcast Friday, and I was pleased to have Russ Colombo of the Bank of Marin join us, along with Danielle, Economic Development Director, and Diane Henderson, President of the Chamber of Commerce. So I think they were helpful, and I know they were helpful in hopefully education with regard to the funds that are available and how you might apply for those, because as you mentioned, we have almost 300 for the separate fund we've established. And we're now making some phone calls, and the community has been great in terms of stepping forward to further fund that most needed plan for our downtown and citywide, Terralinda, Mendocino, et cetera, businesses there. And with 300 applications or 288, you can see there's certainly a demand. So certainly appreciate that. With that, I'm going to bob and weave a little bit. We cover the consent items. There's a reason for that, but I'm going to come back in case our city clerk has anyone that wishes to address us in open session, not with regard to an agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if you are participating on the conference call and wish to speak on an item not on the agenda, please press *9. And while I wait for participants to press *9, I will also request public comments to be submitted through YouTube live chat. Give me one moment. I see no callers pressing *9. And we do have one comment that was submitted. My name is Joan Laudiver. Marin still needs census takers. The pay is $25 per hour plus mileage. Apply online at 2020census.gov/jobs. And that concludes the public comment period.
And that's certainly a good point with regard to census. This has gotten us off track somewhat with regard to that process, not only in San Rafael, but throughout the country, I would suggest. So certainly comments well taken. Let's see. We'll now move on to special presentation. Special presentation. This is fun stuff. Jim, perhaps you can introduce this item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have a special presentation tonight of a swearing-in ceremony for our new fire chief, Chief Darren White. We're very excited to have the new chief join City of San Rafael. He's got some big shoes to fill with Chief Gray retiring, but we think he's up to the challenge. Chief White has over a 30-year career in the fire service, most recently in the city of Oakland, where he was the fire chief there since the beginning of 2017. He also has a couple other interesting things about his bio, is that he was the Alameda County Fire Chief Association president as well, so taking a leadership role in the former county that he was in, and has a Master's of Science in Leadership with an emphasis in disaster preparedness and executive fire leadership. So all things that come in handy at all times, and particularly during a pandemic. I told Chief White that probably his greatest asset that he'll find is the women and men of the San Rafael Fire Department. And I know that's going to be the case. We have an amazing department, and we're also lucky to now have an amazing chief filling in this role for us on an ongoing basis. There's lots of things happening with the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and how we're providing paramedic service and all sorts of things that I know Chief White is going to be very helpful in. So I just want to welcome him to San Rafael and turn it over to the city clerk for the swearing in.
Hi, Chief White.
Hello there.
All right, we're going to go right ahead. If you will repeat after me and raise your right hand. Thank you. I state your name.
I, Darren White,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Chief. We're delighted you're joining our wonderful city, and as was mentioned by Jim, we have a terrific department. I know you've met many of them already, and I think it's going to be an excellent marriage, if you will, between yourself and the department. They really are good folks. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mayor Phillips. Can I make a couple of comments here, or is that timely?
No, please do. We're anxious to hear from you.
I see. Well, first of all, I'm truly excited and I'm truly grateful for this opportunity. I'd like to thank you, Vice Mayor Collin, the City Administrator, Jim Schutz, as well as the Assistant City Manager, Christine Alilovich, definitely Chief Gray. He's been very instrumental in getting me acclimated to the transition here into the organization. Chief Sennett, he's been monumental over the last several weeks as I've been trying to stay engaged from afar and start to slowly but surely begin my transition into the role here. And the warm and welcome reception I've received from all the other staff, including the city clerk, the other directors in the organization. There's been many people from within the community who've reached out to me and offered me nothing but warm and friendly welcoming to Team San Rafael. And I'm very encouraged, and I'm really appreciative of this opportunity. I don't take it lightly. And as you stated, I feel like it's an excellent fit, and I'm going to do my best to not only meet but exceed any expectations and all expectations that you and everyone else have of me. And I'm sorry, I think I left out the council members in my excitement here. I want to thank each of the council members for their support through this entire process, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to a very long and productive career here in San Rafael, and as fire chief of the Marinwood Fire Department as well. So thank you all so much for making this such a blessing for me.
Offer an opportunity to any of the council members that wish to add to the comments thus far. Anyone?
I would just like to welcome Chief White. We are delighted to have you here. And the fact that you're already kind of rolling with the way we're doing business now, we know that it is a great fit. And we look forward to actually all convening in person sometime in the not too distant future.
And I echo those sentiments. Welcome, Chief White.
Thank you.
I do as well. Welcome, Chief White. You're a great member to the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one of the advantages of this format is we have you on tape where you said exceeding expectations. Will exceed expectations. So we got you on tape. In any case, we're just delighted to have you with us. It's going to make it fun. So thank you very much.
I've got some really big shoes to fill with Chief Gray. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to do that. I hope you guys give me some time to actually start to demonstrate anything close to his competency and capability. So thank you.
Well, he's a remarkable individual, and you're very gracious in your thoughts. So thank you for that as well.
Mayor, could I add just one more comment?
Yes, of course.
Vice Mayor Collin said we'll find some other way to celebrate the chief coming on board that isn't on a Zoom call. So we'll make sure that we do that and find a better way to introduce the chief to the community at a more appropriate time.
Good thought, Jim. And this works well, but not quite as the same as a personal handshake. So it's coming. We guarantee you. Thank you again. And with that as a highlight, we'll now move on to the more mundane, if you will, the public hearing starting with termination of the Marin Telecommunications Agency.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor. How
Andrew.
are you?
Good.
I will try to keep it exciting as best I can. With the newborn in the house, this is the latest I've been up in about a month, so it's exciting for me. Tonight I'm here, usually obviously the homeless plan and outreach, but tonight I'm just representing the city manager's office. And as you said, we're talking about dissolving the Marin Telecommunications Agency and transferring its functions to the Marin General Services Agency. I did want to let you know that Jean Bonander, the current executive officer of MTA.
Andrew,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm going to stop you. It seems like we're having a little bit of issue with your audio. Could you do me a favor and cut your camera? And I want to hear, we may not be able to see you, but I want to hear you and see if that sounds a little bit more clear.
How's that?
That's much better. I'm sorry that we can't see you, but we're going to try that.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and restart just slightly. So again, Andrew Henning, I'm our Director of Homeless Planning and Outreach, but tonight I'm representing the City Manager's Office. Tonight the item is dissolving the Marin Telecommunications Agency, transferring its functions to the Marin General Services Agency. I did want to let you know that Jean Bonander, the current Executive Officer of MTA, is on the call. So if you have any more detailed questions, she's definitely part of the team that can help answer. And then, of course, Councilmember McCullough has been San Rafael's representative on the MTA board for a number of years, and is also an authority on the background of this item. So just briefly, the MTA was formed in 1997 with the original purpose of negotiating local franchises for all types of different telecommunications facilities. However, in 2006, the state of California passed the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act, or DIVCA, which preempted a lot of these local cable television franchise mechanisms and negotiating processes that existed about 20 years ago. As a result of this legislation, MTA's function has been fairly significantly curtailed over the years. And right now, they're primarily an administrative role in our community. The biggest function that they play are, number one, collecting franchise and public education and government fees on behalf of the different member agencies, which are basically the different cities and towns in Marin. And then they also oversee a provider agreement with the Community Media Center of Marin. So in this more reduced capacity, last summer, actually, the Marin County Grand Jury published a report finding that because of this limited capacity, they felt like as a standalone public agency, perhaps it would be better if actually MTA were to dissolve and shift its functions over into another joint powers authority in the community, which was the Marin General Services Agency. And again, that's a countywide organization. The city and other jurisdictions did respond to that grand jury report back in the fall. And interestingly, as the year progressed, Jean actually announced her retirement, which is going to be effective June 30th of this year. And with that change in leadership, the MTA board asked staff to consider different options for what would it look like to actually maybe reimagine the structure of this organization. So in addition to the grand jury's recommendation of transitioning MTA's functions to MGSA, staff also looked at potentially just keeping MTA as is and hiring a new executive officer. They looked at retaining the existing structure, but then contracting out for the management to a member agency, such as the County of Marin or the City of San Rafael. And then they also looked at just completely dissolving MTA and having individual member agencies, so the City of San Rafael being an example, collecting the fees and operating the different contracts on their own. Ultimately, they felt like the fourth option, which was the original grand jury recommendation of transferring or dissolving MTA and then transferring its functions to MGSA, was probably the best option. And that's what's being proposed tonight. It is worth noting that beyond simply the efficiency of dissolving this agency and then combining its functions with another JPA that's also capable of doing that, it's expected that there will be some annual cost savings, probably around the ballpark of $100,000 that won't start accruing this coming fiscal year, but in future fiscal years. And thus there'll be some positive net revenue back to the city. So in light of all this, staff recommends that the council move forward with two items tonight. The first is an ordinance that would repeal Chapter 10.74 of the San Rafael Municipal Code, which would basically terminate MTA. And then the second function would be a resolution, which would then authorize MGSA to take over the previous functions of MTA. So those two items together are before you tonight. And at this point, we'll take any questions or comments.
Well, thank you for your report, first of all, Andrew, and then I'll ask if there are comments from council members. Anyone? Apparently there are none. Therefore, let's go to the public. If anyone wishes to address us on this matter from the public, now would be the time. And Madam City Clerk, maybe you can assist them as to how they might go about that if there's a question.
Thank you, Mayor Phillips. If you are participating by conference call, would you please press *9 if you'd like to comment on this item? And while I wait for those to press *9, I will request that you submit your comments through YouTube at this time. So I'm seeing no comments on the telephone. And I am seeing no comments on YouTube Live.
In which case, I'll close public and now turn to council members once again for final concluding comments or two motions regarding this item.
Well, Mr. Mayor, if I could make a comment.
Please do.
Yeah, this is Andrew McCullough. For those on the line, Andrew Henning's summary was, and the staff report that went with it were perfectly adequate, I think, for our consideration. But I did want to make just one or two additional points that may have been missed in the staff report. One, and they most significantly, they tie into the work of the grand jury last summer. As you may recall, the grand jury came to us after studying the MTA and came to several conclusions. And their objective or their recommendation in the end was that the MTA should dissolve and that its functions be taken over by a JPA like the MGSA. So it's somewhat ironic that we find ourselves in this position now, having passed on the opportunity to do this in response to the grand jury's recommendation, but that we're proposing to do it now. And I'd like to just fill in that gap if I could. So before the grand jury came to its conclusion, the board of the MTA, which consists of representatives from the city councils of, I think, 9 of the jurisdictions in Marin County, the local jurisdictions, had already considered whether or not we could dissolve the MTA and achieve the savings and efficiencies that have been mentioned in the staff report. And we looked to the MGSA as a possible recipient of the transfer of these services. But at the time, they didn't have the capacity to accept that transfer. And since we had already hired Jean Bonander, and we had done so at a lower rate, she was, I think, a 0.5 FTE as opposed to our previous executive director, who was a 0.8 FTE, we had already achieved some savings. So our goal was, in hiring her, we proposed to her that we continue to find ways to economize and potentially dissolve the MTA, and that she would preside over its dissolution. So with that as background, the grand jury report came out. We didn't have the opportunity to transfer the functions of the MTA then, but in combination with Ms. Bonander's announced retirement, and she gave us, to her credit, 7 or 8 or 9 months notice, the MGSA also stepped forward and said, we now have the capacity if the functions of the MTA can be transferred to us. So it's a happy circumstance that what wasn't possible in 2019 is possible in 2020. And so I provide that as background, and unless others have comments, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Just that we appreciate your service on that committee, and thanks for doing so. And a motion would now be appropriate.
Okay. Then I move, I'm sorry, to our city clerk. Should I make separate motions here?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the first motion would be that we pass to print an ordinance to terminate the MTA by repealing Chapter 10.74 of the Municipal Code.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
The matter carries 5-0. And second item?
Yeah, the second motion is that we adopt the resolution authorizing the MGSA to collect franchise and PEG fees from the cable television providers on behalf of the city of San Rafael, and to otherwise exercise the functions previously performed by the MTA.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Collin,
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin,
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough,
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0, and thanks again, Andrew, for your work on the committee. We'll now move to item 7, other agenda items. Village at Loch Lomond Marina Development. Mr. City Manager, or perhaps Paul, or
Yes.
a staff person. You decide.
Good evening, Mayor Phillips and City Council members, and for all the participants. My name is Paul Jensen. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. And actually joining me tonight as part of the staff team is Ethan Guy, our Principal Analyst. Ethan worked closely on one of the 2 items that's part of consideration tonight, the below market rate agreement amendment. And then the second is Al Cornwell with CSW Stuber Stroh. Al has been overseeing this project for some time on behalf of the city. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to a PowerPoint presentation and provide some background. If you can give me a moment, please, and I'll get this started. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So what I'd like to do is, without getting too far into the weeds and a lot of detail, I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible and provide you starting with some background on the project. The Village at Loch Lomond Marina Development was approved in 2017, and what it approved was retaining and improving a full-service marina with some new support facilities, also developing a new grocery store and neighborhood commercial uses, developing 81 residential units. What was approved and required for the housing development were that 17 of the units be set aside as below market rate units for sale in the price range of moderate and low income. This represents slightly over a 20% inclusionary housing component for this project. Also included in the approval was the development of a marina green, boardwalk, playground, and recreation use areas. Not only is this required as part of our parkland dedication provisions for the housing component, but is required by the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. This project is along the bayfront, which requires public access. And the park improvements are publicly accessible, but they're privately maintained. Privately maintained, meaning that their costs for maintenance and long-term oversight is handled through what's called a community facilities district. And lastly, the last components of the project was to expand and preserve a seasonal wetland. There was no activity on this project for about 6 years because of the Great Recession. So construction started somewhere around 2013 or 2014. And just prior to construction, 2 final subdivision maps were recorded with the county. The first subdivision map, which is called Phase 1, is a division of the marina into large use parcels and also includes the improvements of what we call the backbone infrastructure, which is essentially the roadway system, utilities, the park improvements, and the seasonal wetland restoration work. All of the things that you need to build on this property and to serve that development. The second phase is a division of the residential areas, and this is called the Strand, into residential lots, which includes the infrastructure for that area, lot pad grading, utilities, and then included in this second phase were some off-site improvements along Point San Pedro Road that were required as part of the initial approval. These improvements that are required are secured through what's called subdivision improvement agreements, for which the developer is required to post securities, usually in the form of a bond, to ensure that the improvements are going to get installed. And 2 security bonds were posted in the amount of $5 million and $1.9 million to cover phases 1 and 2. So fast forward 2020, where are we in terms of the activity of this project? As you read in the staff report, construction activity has been slow on this development. What is completed to date are the infrastructure improvements under the phase 1 of the subdivision improvement agreement, with some minor outstanding items that are not completed. And again, that includes the main roadway system, utilities, all of the recreation facilities, including the marina green and boardwalk, the playground on the central jetty area, which, if you can see the arrow on the slide, this is the central jetty area. Public access at various points, including an access to the breakwater. The breakwater was required to be upgraded, and that was also handled as part of this work. And then in terms of upland development, the first phase of the Strand, 44 units has been built, of which 11 of the 17 below market rate units have been built and have been sold. If you could see this area at the eastern portion of phase 1, these white footprint areas, these are undeveloped lots under phase 1. There are 5 of them that are undeveloped. In addition, Andy's Market has been built and the Marina Day Use Parking has been built. I want to draw to your attention the 2 red arrows, because that's critical to the discussion, particularly with regard to your action this evening. You have heard and probably are aware that these are 2 areas of the site that were subject to flooding during extreme storm events and also high tides. And that occurrence has started about 3 or 4 years ago. And it's caused quite a bit of damage to the improvements that have been put in there. And so we've been working with the developer to get flooding improvement drawings completed, which I will explain in a few minutes. So what's not built? The second phase of the Strand, which are 32 units, of which 4 are below market rate. The mixed-use building, which includes 5 residential units, of which 2 are below market rate. The upland, what we call sticks and bricks marina facilities, which include the Marina Harbor Master office, restaurant, yacht club improvements, and the boat repair building and fueling facilities. And then there are kayak launch and kayak dock improvements that have not been installed. And then the flooding improvements that I just briefly referenced. With regard to the flooding improvements, about a year ago, the city staff approved flooding improvements for the 2 areas. These have also been approved by the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. The drawing on the left is basically the central jetty where the playground is located. The improvement to reduce flooding is to essentially install a higher dam or a wall along the eastern edge of the playground area, and some other improvements to keep it from becoming flooded during peak events. And on the right, this is the connector to the breakwater. What is critical about this area is part of the flooding that occurs here is intentional, primarily because at high tide, under the original approvals, it was intended that water feed the wetland to the east, and so that it becomes a viable wetland during those conditions. What this plan proposes is to raise the elevation of both the western and eastern portions of this connection, and then lowering the center so that water can concentrate in this area and feed that wetland. And then within that area would be an elevated boardwalk. So that's a wood structure that allows permanent public access over this area once these improvements have been completed. And it's been estimated by the developer that this work would take 4 to 6 months. So there's been a lot of recent activity that brings us here this evening. First, and within the last 6 months, there's been some new management at MVA. MVA is Marina Village Associates. They're the property owners. And the new management has brought some stimulation to this project in negotiating the sale or potential sale of the marina and potential sale of the second phase of the residential project portion of the project. With regard to the marina sales, that's been in negotiation. The project sponsor is available to speak to this evening. They've been negotiating with Safe Harbor Marinas, who also owns a marina in Emeryville and Alameda. They're a well-respected marina throughout the United States. And their plan is to come in and build out the upland remaining sticks and bricks buildings that are needed to complete out the marina portion of the project. With regard to the potential sale of the Strand and also the mixed-use building, there is a local builder interested in this, but it is contingent upon MVA's ability to get the 6 of the remaining unbuilt below market rate units released from this requirement, which is one of the things that you are considering this evening. I mentioned the new consolidated subdivision improvement agreement. The 2 subdivision improvement agreements that were approved a number of years ago have expired. So regardless of whether there's a property sale, this is necessary in order to complete out the 2 phases of work. And with regard to the subdivision improvement agreement, I mentioned the 2 phases. The first phase is to complete some of the remaining outstanding improvements and also the flooding improvements, and then completion of the second phase, which is the infrastructure needs for the Strand and offsite improvements along Point San Pedro Road. With this, the securities that we have under the expired agreements would be released. New securities would be posted in the amount of $2.4 million. And the agreement is structured to require that the improvements be installed, including the flooding improvements, by December 31st, 2021. And we purposely inserted this date because it is consistent with the deadline that's been given to the developer by BCDC for this same work. So we want to be consistent with BCDC's deadline. So in terms of the 2 phases, the diagram on the left is phase 1. You'll see the hatched areas are the 2 areas where the flooding improvements need to occur, and then several other smaller improvements that need to be finished out under phase 1. And phase 2 essentially covers the remaining portions of the Strand and off-site improvements that are required along Point San Pedro Road. Now, moving on to the BMR agreement amendment, and most of our work on that's been presented to you tonight has been focused on this particular issue. As I mentioned, the current requirement for the project is that the project provides 17 below market rate for sale units. 11 have been built and occupied in the first phase of the Strand. Now, the proposal is to buy out the 6 remaining units. If this right now were an undeveloped project, unapproved, and they were to approach the city and say, we want to buy out our below market rate requirement, our buyout amount right now is about $350,000 per unit, which equating to 6 units, that would be about $2.1 million. However, we have a BMR agreement that's been in place since 2008. And interestingly, within that agreement, there is a provision for buyout, and it utilizes a specific formula that factors in a market rate sales price. And I'm pretty much simplifying how this works. Ethan, Guy, could probably expand on how this works. But essentially what it equates to is about $600,000 per unit buyout for a total buyout amount of $3.6 million. This money would in turn, once collected, would be deposited into our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Now, I do want to say, if we were having this conversation about a year and a half ago, it would be a non-starter. We have a very strong inclusionary housing requirement that we've had in place since 1986 that requires that a developer of a market rate project include below market rate units within their project. However, within the last year, we are looking at different ways to make sure that we can get housing development approved and constructed in San Rafael. And if you may recall, last fall we presented a fairly significant report to the City Council on housing priority policies and revisiting some of our policies. And one of the policies that we presented revisiting was our inclusionary housing policy, including looking at options and menus such as buyouts. So this proposal is consistent with that approach. The second point that I want to make is that they don't want to buy out the entire development. Obviously, 11 units within this project are below market rate units, which represents 2/3 of their obligation, which is about a 13% housing component for the project as a whole. In many cities, their inclusionary housing requirement is at 10%. Ours is at 20%, so that's a respectable amount, and I do want to, put emphasis on that. And then lastly, the buyout amount would provide a significant contribution to our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which would make this money available to a number of projects that are in wait that offer a variety of housing types and a range of affordability. So the timing, we believe at staff level, that the timing is good to consider this proposal. Now, I do want to cover one more thing because this issue has come up repeatedly during the course of the last several years about the construction activity on this project. And as you've been made aware, we have a Marina Oversight Committee, which is representatives from the neighboring associations, including a representative from the Strand and also Point San Pedro Road Coalition. We meet monthly and we talk about the status of the project. There has been a level of frustration because of the halting of the construction activity over this last period of time. And I do want to mention that the agreements that are before you tonight do not cover building construction or the construction schedule. What they do cover are the infrastructure to support buildings. The city approvals that have been granted are an entitlement. So we don't have any mandates in our approval that say you must build this, with one exception. The one mandate that was established when this project was originally approved was that the new Andes Market had to be up and in operation before the old Andes Market could be demolished. Had we had a development agreement with the original developer on this project, we would have had an opportunity to build in perhaps a construction schedule for sticks and bricks construction, but we do not have that. Needless to say, staff has been employing measures to try to stimulate and incentivize the developer to complete this project, including extending building permits and also approving those flooding improvements at an administrative level to streamline the process. So we've tried to do our part to keep things moving on this project. If the property sales go through, there are some estimated timeframes for construction that are outlined in the staff report, but again, I will defer to the applicant to speak to these when it's their time. So the recommendations that are before you tonight include a resolution to authorize the mayor and city manager to sign a consolidated subdivision improvement agreement, which would include the new securities amount, adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to sign a memorandum of understanding. We believe this is necessary primarily because there's a lot going on here. There's another party involved as well, the Marin Housing Authority, which is one party to the below market rate agreement. And then lastly, adopting a resolution that would authorize the city manager to sign the below market rate agreement. Before I close, and I do want to mention that Ethan and Al Cornwell and I are available to respond to questions. We did receive some correspondence on this item, some support for the below market rate agreement amendment, some that do not support the agreement, and then there are several other correspondence that's been distributed to the city council. And with that, I will close. And
Thank you, Paul, for your complete presentation as normal. Appreciate that. Let's start with comments and we'll go down the list. Councilmember Bushy. Any comments, questions?
My question would be for the applicant regarding the construction schedule, so I'll hold that.
Good, okay. Vice Mayor Collin?
Yes, I have a question. So, Paul, I did read the letters from folks that really wanted us to support having the units built. Could you talk to what other types of projects would be supported by having the money go into an affordable housing fund?
yes, in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I will defer to Ethan on this because
Okay.
he's launched a pre-application process for our Affordable Housing in lieu fee fund, and there are a handful of projects.
No, that'd be great. Thank you.
So we did, as Paul mentioned, we did issue a pre-application for notice of funding availability for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we received about $6.5 million in requests to that trust fund. Some of those projects are ones that have come before the council already. That includes 190 Mill Street and Homeward Bound project, the Whistle Stop by Marin project, but it also includes projects like acquisition rehab of other properties that are already built, both in the canal and downtown San Rafael. So there's a slew of other projects that we could leverage this money for in order to build more units or even to protect existing units. Additionally, we outlined it a little bit in the staff report, but there is quite a bit of funding available at the state level that requires a local match. So that could be programs like the Local Housing Trust Fund or Local Housing Trust Fund Match Program, or other larger bundles of funding amounts that were allocated both in 2017 and in this latest budget cycle through the state. So the idea would be if we have more money in the trust fund, we're better able to leverage those funds.
Yeah, and that really answers my questions. My sense is that these are very special dollars because they can be leveraged for other projects, and we ultimately can bring other projects and more dollars to San Rafael. So thank you for that. No more questions for me, Mayor.
Councilmember Gamelin, thank you.
Sorry, got it. Sorry. I'll get it one of these days. Thanks, Paul, for the presentation. The question I have is, in terms of the units that are being requested not to be built, do we have an idea of what those would be priced at and into the current market for the below market rates? Is it, 50% of the value of the current, marketable value, or is it 75%? Where would those be, and what kind of that dollar would that? I know you mentioned what would be put into the thing, but what would actually those go for if they sold?
I know that. Am I on mute? No, I'm not. Good. Okay. I know that Ethan factored this into working with the developer. So again, I'm sorry, Ethan, but I'm going to defer to you. You know the numbers far better than I do.
Yeah. So that did go into the factor of how we came to the BMR buyout. Essentially, as part of the MOU between us, MVA, and Marin Housing Authority, we had to set a theoretical market price based upon what we believe the market costs per unit. So that came to 7.5 million, or about I think 1.25 per unit per property itself. And then we also used the current MHA sale price at that time, which, depending upon the size of the property, some of them were townhomes, some of them were single family homes, was about, I think, $250,000 per unit. So there was a pretty difference in price between those two properties, or between those two sale prices. That being said, part of the driving force behind moving forward with a deal is the ability to leverage the per unit amount to create more units. So generally, an in lieu fee, which is that $350,000 per unit fee, generally how you set that per unit in lieu fee is the assumed subsidy needed to make a market rate unit below market rate. So if we use that to kind of guide what that difference is we would be realizing quite a bit more per unit in what it would take to subsidize for affordable housing per unit.
And let me just add, John, so you're in the report, there's the table X actually, that shows the estimated BMR sales price, open market sales price. And I'll just add, so you know, we've looked at this. This advantages the developer by about $1 million.
Yeah, and that's completely accurate. It does provide a net profit to the developer of about $1 million. The other way to also look at it as well is that the incentive for the city to come to the table is that we would be realizing a higher sale price as well. So if we were to look at just through the in lieu fees or just through the below market sales price, assuming that that's how we value those units, we would be seeing an additional realization of about $1.2 million.
Yeah, and I'm not concluding. I'm just saying that based on the schedule, it results in an advantage of about $1 million.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm sorry, John. Did you have?
Yeah. Just to that point, the dollar amount that we put into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, you know, while it, as you point out, Mr. Mayor, that it benefits the developer to the tune of $1 million, you know, per the staff report, I also agree that we can see this as a leverage in what we can do with that money that we don't have the ability to do right now, whether that be to help develop, you know, 17 units in a different location rather than the 10 units that are here. There might be an ability to really expand on our affordable housing goals by this funds rather than, my point being is that if those houses are priced at $350,000 or $400,000 or $250,000, that still might not be affordable for a lot of the folks that are be looking to buy their house. And if we can use those funds to get more people into housing than someone that is going to go ahead and buy a house at those prices, then I see it as a worthwhile endeavor, and that's why I'd support that.
And that's a valid point, and thanks for adding that. Councilman McCullough.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, are you recognizing me?
Yes, sir, I am. Any questions or points?
Yeah, very briefly. Paul, can you remind me, and I'm sure it's in the staff report, but I don't remember now the detail, the phase one improvements that are envisioned in this agreement, do those remain the obligation of the current owner of the property, MVA?
Yes.
So if the transaction takes place where MVA sells the residential component and then sells the marina component, they still retain the obligation to make the common area or infrastructure improvements that are the phase one improvements?
That is correct, and that's what we understand from the MVA representative, and Mr. DePrima could probably respond to this in more detail, but the agreement is executed with MVA. They post the securities. So let's say they were to sell it and they would have to, and they would pass that on to someone else, have to come back to us with a subdivision improvement agreement amendment as a successor, and then post new bonds. But that's the way we understand is that they are holding that responsibility.
So you actually answered or anticipated my next question, which was that obligation to complete those phase one improvements. Is that an obligation that's assignable or transferable by them? And it sounds like it is, even though it's still subject to the security that's or the bonds that are securing the completion of those improvements.
That is correct. And I'm not an expert on how subdivision improvement agreements work. Al Cornwell may be able to provide a better response, but like many agreements, even the BMR agreement, if a new buyer comes in and they're obligated to be a successor in interest on that agreement, then you have to go back and make that change.
Well, I wouldn't mind hearing from the current owner how they anticipate completing these improvements, and perhaps by way of background, what happened over the last 12 years that resulted in where we are now, which is, frankly, a disappointing production of housing during a pretty robust period. Love to hear about that and why we should have the confidence that we're going to see these improvements completed on time and in the manner envisioned in the staff report.
Excellent question, and I'll just comment quickly, and then we'll turn to the developer Paul so directs. I think I understand the economics. I think as a council, we understand the economics that I mentioned. There is an advantage to the developer in this case, but also we are advantaged. I would suggest, as Councilmember Gamlin mentioned, that we'll be receiving reflected in the report, we'll be receiving $3.6 million to put into the fund that we can in fact leverage, as was pointed out. And I think that is an advantage. Slight disadvantage is, and this was pointed out in several letters that we received, that we may be foregoing perhaps a more immediate infusion of BMR units, below market rate units. However, if we leverage the funds, we would hope that we might actually get more on an accelerated basis. But I would encourage, and I know that, Paul, you're working on this, but the Affordable Housing Trust, wherein we're going to be talking about policy matters regarding the units and the buyout of them. I think this is a one-off, at least until we address it by way of policy. So I don't want to defer those units, defer the construction of those units, but I do think we're approaching it in a reasonable fashion with immediate benefit to the housing fund that we'll receive. And since we are working on a policy that will address future similar events where there are BMR units that may be bought out. And so this is not a trend line, this is not a continuum, but rather at this point in time, we're addressing the issue. But you had mentioned, Paul, perhaps maybe it's the current developer or the prior developer that has addressed this issue and can help us better understand the point that Councilmember McCullough just brought up, and that is why, through this robust period, as he pointed out, these units were not built. So I don't know if you can direct to the appropriate person. I'd appreciate it if you could.
Mr. DePrima is participating this evening from MVA, so we'll let him respond to that. They've owned the project for quite a few years through Woodbridge Capital.
Thank you. Who have you called upon?
Hi, I'm Tom DePrima representing Marina Village Associates.
Thank you.
First and foremost, I would like to thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Manager, and council members for consideration of this amendment. And I really want to thank Paul and Ethan. We've been working on this for quite a while. I joined Marina Village about a year ago and was assigned from our company to go in and try to figure out how we could get this project restored and moving forward. A little background, I was with a large public builder for 22 years. And so I have a lot of friends in the industry and some friends up in the Bay Area. So as I started working through the project, I tried to identify what were the challenges. And I don't have the history of being here for the full 12 years, but I can tell you that some of the things I identified were from the beginning, the team that was put in place here kind of oversold themselves on their abilities to what they could do. And it put the project in a very difficult situation. And so subsequently, we've made changes, and those members are no longer associated with Marina Village Associates. During the time when I came in, one of the things that we are very strong as a company on is our ability to do land development. As we took on the housing component, we brought in some people locally that we thought were going to be very strong and be able to do a very good job here. And essentially, they were just not the right people. And so I started to reach out to some of my builder friends to see if there was an opportunity where we might be able to leverage relationships, bring them in where they have a strong development team or a building team in place, have a strong purchasing team, be able to make quick decisions and the right decisions in order to build this. As I was moving through that process, I started to run into a lot of people that actually expressed interest in, rather than coming in and being a fee builder for us, to actually potentially buy the project and finish it out. And it really was the area that started to make a lot of sense. We had made a lot of progress along that way, unfortunately, through some confidentiality agreements and the stoppage through the COVID-19 pandemic. We haven't finished working through those purchase and sale agreements. So I'm not at liberty to answer too much, but I can explain as much as I can to address some of those questions. Fortunately, I did have a very good meeting with Safe Harbor and asked them if it would be okay if I was able to share their information. They're very proud of who they are as a marina operator, and I can tell you that while it has slightly stalled out as we're working through some challenges in this pandemic, we are still working and communicating with them every day. We are still working through trying to finalize a lot of the components to that agreement through BCDC and other agencies. But the good news is they're still very excited about the project, and that is still moving along nicely. So we hope to maybe see a conclusion of that in the next maybe 30 to 45 days.
Sorry about that.
That being said, I'm going to, I do want to try to address the housing schedule and the challenge with that. And the reality is that most builders operate off of construction loans. And so what would happen coming in is they would have to generate X sales before they could start the next group of homes. And then at some point, those construction loans are tied to total inventory. So they would actually have to close some homes in order to move along. I don't know where the current market is going to land when this is done. The one interesting thing in talking with several of my builder friends, they have gone to online presentations and by appointment and social distancing as they do contracts. Their sales are actually stayed fairly robust. I can tell you that there are a lot of components of why this kind of stalled out during that robust period, from anything from having to get surcharge down and getting those lots ready, which was a process that took 5 or 6 months. And then just as we started to get the surcharge settled in and ready to remove, we kind of ran into some other issues. And at that point, that's when I was able to entertain potentially bringing in a marina operator and a builder. One of the other questions that I wanted to try to address, and that was, I know the question came up about who would do what improvements and how that would work. For the most part, for the builder, the only subdivision improvements that they would have to do would be the finishing of those private cul-de-sacs for entry into the homes. And the way it would be structured is we would, MVA would, as part of this sale, before they would close, we would actually go in and put in the underground wet and dry utilities. The only thing we wouldn't finish was the actual paving. And the reason for that is, that's got that kind of stamped asphalt or AC paving. And if we were to put that in now while they're constructing the houses, it would get fairly damaged and it doesn't patch very well. So that would be the only component that the home builder would finish. All the offsite improvements, all the flooding improvements, the finishing of the kayak launch and the kayak dock, all those would be through MVA. And all these agreements have ties for us to perform that work. So not only would we be tied to the subdivision improvement agreement and to the surety bonds, but we're also tied into the purchase and sale agreements between the other parties. So I don't know if that answers that question. And I'm sure you have a little bit more detailed questions, so I'll be happy to try to answer those a little bit one by one for you.
Let me ask Councilmember McCullough, because you posed the excellent question, to respond.
Yeah, Tom, with all due respect, I don't find your explanation particularly satisfying as it relates to the history of the project. I recognize you weren't there for much of it. Nevertheless, it It strains credulity that for 12 years, MVA couldn't get the job done and couldn't finish these the residential units and then the associated infrastructure work, separate and aside from the vertical improvements for the marina itself. But be that as it may, I'm hearing you say that MVA itself, assuming that you ink deals with on the sale of the marina and with the sale of the residential component, that MVA itself is going to complete these offsite improvements, which include the boardwalk and the kayak and the central jetty and the whatever the rest of it is. You are going to complete that by, I think it's December of 2021. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so we won't have to have any recourse to the bonds that are being posted as security?
That's correct.
And you yourself, will you personally be responsible for overseeing the remainder of this project?
Yes, I've taken on the full responsibility for everything on this project since I've come aboard. From the sales to the closing of the sales to completion of the work. Daryl Cruiser, who's been here for a few years, is also working with me, and I've had a great working relationship with Daryl. He's been a wealth of information for me, and I feel very confident between us of our ability to get that done.
So, final question here. Obviously, the approvals you're seeking tonight are a condition precedent to your closing on the transactions you have in mind. Are there any other open issues or open conditions that stand in the way of your closing on these two significant transactions? That is the marina sale and the residential sale.
I tried to address most of those components within the letter that I had sent Paul, and the components that are left are working through with BCDC and one of MDA's agreements with Safe Harbor is that we would complete the process of getting the fuel dock to a permit, and then we would also complete all the public access, and we would also help them through the permit process of anything that's left outstanding that they would have to do relative to the city or BCDC. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the BCDC agreements, the last component of those agreements, I know we stated that, Paul had mentioned that they're approved, but they aren't completely approved. So for example, on the flooding improvement, the design and the repair and the construction for correcting the flooding is approved. Pending now, what BCDC would need is the issuance of the permit, which is part of this MOU and subdivision improvement agreement. And then we also need to complete and finalize the kayak launch, which I'm not sure if you're aware, but we've been working with the kayak enthusiasts within Marin County that have asked us to make that a little larger and a little bit more accessible to meet some of the guidelines within the ADA, American Disability Act, that's for accessibility. And the one dilemma there is, and we're still working through, and we were moving quite quickly with BCDC up until the pandemic, and then they've been pretty much non-responsive over the last 35 days. But we have to look at that additional bay fill and to make sure that that bay fill won't classify as a need for mitigation or offsite mitigation, because we don't have any offsite mitigation left. But the good thing is the last meeting we had, which was on March 12th with BCDC at their office, they felt based on the material we were going to be putting in there and the reduction of some of the riprap, that it would probably be neutral and we probably would be able to do that. So that component's still outstanding, we're working through. And then the last component is working through the kayak dock, which again, we're trying to increase to make it a little bit more accessible to meet better ADA guidelines. And that may involve needing to actually build a second gangway down to it so that we can put in some railing to assist with that access of that ramp on the days where the tide is, or at the times in the day when the tides are low. The challenge of using the existing gangway is if we were to put railing on that, then you don't have the gangway accessible for being able to bring a boat in and launch and get on your boat. So so we're working through that component as well, and whether or not that will meet BCDC's guidelines for any additional bay fill as well.
Okay, that's helpful to understand by way of context. But my question specifically was, these are all obligations you've undertaken when you talk about the kayak launch and ramp and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But my question, though, is, are there any other business issues that remain open between you and the purchaser of the residential component and you and Safe Harbors Marina, the purchaser of the marina component, apart from getting the approvals you're seeking tonight?
Well,
and obviously, you've got to complete these infrastructure improvements. That's a condition.
Yes.
But that's a condition within your control. Are there any other open conditions, perhaps outside of your control, that you still need to have satisfied before this goes through?
I can tell you relative to Safe Harbor, for the most part, we are just working through title agreements and things for access and understanding those type of things, but I feel pretty comfortable where we are. Relative to the builder, because we don't have an executed purchase and sale agreement, they're still within their due diligence period, so I don't know what they would bring up. So I can't honestly answer that and say there isn't anything when I don't know, because I've not yet received a single list of demands from them. I can tell you probably the only area that based on that I know that I could speak to that I know of as of today is that as part of the development of the mixed use building, the tenants within the mixed use building would end up having the period built in within their lease for notification, and then they would have to move out obviously while we build that building. In kind of analyzing some of the outlines within the orders of eviction, even though we have a lease agreement that has a provision to give them, say, 60-day notice to be out, that is not going to be enforceable under the guidelines. So that would push that portion of the closing out to where I kind of look at it as the way I interpret the law, at a minimum of 6 months from when the stay of order is lifted. I don't know whether or not that becomes an issue. On some of the conversations I've had with the builder, they're not overly worried about that because it wasn't going to be the first thing they were going to build. They wanted to get in and quickly start working on the 10 building permits while we remove the surcharge and go ahead and get the townhome units ready for construction.
Okay. Thank you for your responses.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't.
Council members, before we go to public, anyone? In which case, let's go to public comment with regard to this agenda item.
Hi, if you are participating by conference call and wish to speak, please press *9. While I wait for participants to press *9, I will also request for public comments to be submitted through YouTube. Okay, we have a couple callers who would wish to speak. Go right ahead, you should be unmuted.
Okay, good evening. This is Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael. It's good to see you all. And I look forward to the day when the public can also have a visual here. It'd be great. So Sustainable San Rafael is concerned that the proposed buyout of Loch Lomond's commitment to provide the remaining affordable housing units could set a precedent for future developments to undermine one of the primary purposes of the city's inclusionary housing requirements, which is to provide the economically integrated neighborhoods that are essential for a balanced community, and if San Rafael is to remain such a balanced community. We're also concerned that the loss of truly inclusionary housing invariably means that the provisions of much-needed affordable units will be delayed, even while more affluent people will be having their housing built. So we would ask that you ask staff or instruct staff to address and to avoid such outcomes as they continue the challenging task of developing and applying San Rafael's housing policies. Should the Loch Lomond development proceed as proposed, we further request that the housing funds received be used to secure additional affordable workforce housing, with the emphasis on workforce, preferably within other market rate developments and neighborhoods. That is the same kind of housing units that are being lost here at Loch Lomond. I trust that staff will take a look at the other items raised in our letter that we submitted and consider those as well as they move forward with housing policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. And as I mentioned earlier, we're equally concerned, or certainly concerned, about the same issues. And so thank you for sending us your letter of concern. And I do think that our staff in putting together Affordable Housing Trust will talk more about this by way of policy. So thank you for that. Next public, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi, this is Elaine Tokolahi. I'm a below market rate homeowner at the Strand. I met some of you at our home. We hosted National Night Out over here at the Strand. It's nice to see you again. My husband Fatai and I are both employees at San Rafael Nonprofits. My husband's a caseworker for people with disabilities, and I'm a volunteer director. We're able to work in these nonprofits because we live in the same city where we work. There's a high turnover in nonprofits that provide essential services, but we're able to stay in our jobs as essential workers because we own a home here. And my fellow BMR owner neighbors include City of San Rafael staff, medical personnel, teachers, restaurant managers, and more. I read the staff report, the long staff report that was prepared on this topic, and also the informational report on the challenges to approving and developing housing. And it became very clear that it's the city's opinion that it's in your best interest to approve the proposal because the city can put so much in the Affordable Housing Fund. But I think that the missing piece in the staff report was the San Rafael working class perspective, or in this COVID-19 era, the essential worker perspective. I'm wondering if more housing options are actually going to go to the people that the essential service workers are serving, namely people transitioning out of homelessness or seniors who live in low-income housing. Those high-need communities need workers who can actively support them and who live nearby and can be called on in emergencies. So my request as a San Rafael resident is that I'm asking the City Council, like the person who spoke before me, to prioritize workforce housing in its decision-making, particularly workforce housing that can be completed quickly to address the current housing shortage. Thank you so much.
And thanks for your comments. Well spoken. Anyone else? Lindsay?
There are two more.
Okay, thank you. Yes, public comment, please.
Did anyone just receive a notification to speak? I'm going to try to mute you and unmute you. You should receive it on the notification. I'm going to move on to the next caller.
Thank you.
Who?
Yes, it's a little awkward, and please bear with us, but if you could present your point.
This is Jim Dixon. Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm a resident of San Pedro Cove. I've been there for 25 years, and we are adjacent to the marina development and with the open space, which our association is responsible for. between us and the marina. And I have several issues that I'd like to address. And one of the issues I'd address from two different perspectives. I read over the staff report in relation to the fuel dock. Now, I know I followed this very carefully for years as being a boat owner with a boat over in C-24 in the marina, that the fuel dock is a definite requirement by the BCDC. Now, I read the staff report, and they mention in there that the Safe Harbor Marina is saying, well, maybe they'll build a fuel dock or not, depending how important it is. Well, a fuel dock is the life and blood of a marina. The nearest fuel docks to San Rafael are down in Sausalito. So people who go down there to fill up their boats, by the time they get back to San Rafael, they're on the way to go back down there to fill it up again. It doesn't make any sense that it should be allowed, the Safe Harbor Marina should be allowed to not definitely have the fuel dock there. And coming at it from a different angle, one of my next door neighbors is the chairperson of the Disaster Preparedness Committee for the San Pedro Road Coalition. And he heard that there was going to be this meeting tonight. He asked me to throw in a plug for him to say that by having the diesel there, in case of a disaster, San Pedro Road is a one-way street in and out, and there will probably be very much difficulty to get into that area. And certainly for people who want to get their boats there or out of there, to have a fuel dock would be of great help in a disaster, which might lie ahead in terms of fire, in terms of earthquakes, or whatever. So I think that you should definitely require that the Safe Harbor Marina follow through on what I understand is a requirement by the BCDC that they have that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
And thanks for adding your point. Anyone else?
It does look like I have one. Oh, there we go. One moment.
Okay. Yeah, I'm John Rose from the Canal, and also with First United Methodist Church San Rafael, and also a member of MOC. I support what Bill Carney says and the other person about workforce housing. We need to get that as quick as possible. I appreciate money going into the trust fund. That's great, but that is a long-term thing. So I really associate myself with what Bill Carney said and with the person said about workforce housing. That needs to be provided for the people that need to, and integrated into market rate housing places would be very helpful. So I support that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Was that the last person or not?
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Please press *9. Looks like one person may be having, oh, here we go.
818, yeah.
Mm-hmm. This may have been the same phone number who had some difficulty speaking previously. With the last digits of 01 of your telephone number, you've been invited to speak. You may be on mute if you could unmute your telephone.
Okay, can you hear me? My name's Chris Johnson.
Yes, we can, Chris. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate everything that I've heard here this evening. I want to tell you folks that my wife and I live at the Strand at Loch Lomond Marina. We moved here 3 years ago after working our tails off for 30 plus years in order to afford a dream house. And when we moved here, and we own one of the townhouses, and when we moved here, we were told that the entire project would be completed within a year. And that obviously hasn't happened, much to our chagrin. And it seems obvious to me that if Marina Village Associates can't get the job done, let's get somebody in here
who can get the job done. Because not only will it benefit everybody who lives at this development, but it will also benefit the entire neighborhood. Rather than looking at an empty lot that's filled with equipment and dirt and weeds. I think it's in everybody's interest to approve this proposal. Let's get people in here who are committed, a local builder. I love the idea. A local builder who's connected to the community, Marina Village Associates. They're based in Century City in Southern California. So I don't think they have the same a feeling about our community. They couldn't possibly have the same as we do. So I think that this proposal should be approved. Let's get somebody in here who can do the job, and everybody will benefit, including the affordable housing interests, which will receive a significant amount of money for future projects. I appreciate what you're doing. I urge you to approve this proposal.
And thank you for your comment. Anyone else? Hello? 6789, do you wish to address us?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Alan Shavitz. I'm a board member of the Bayside, I'm sorry.
Alan, I don't know if you can hear me, but you just cut out.
Seems to be, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Now we can.
Okay. Yes, my name is Alan Shavitz. I'm a board member of the Point San Pedro Coalition, also a board member of the Bayside Acres Homeowners Association, which is adjacent to the development. You have a letter in your packet from the coalition that basically lays out our position. We're in favor of both of the proposals, the BMR agreement and the SIA agreement, with some cautionary notes based on our having been involved in this development for many more years than just 2007. We basically got started in 2002, involved in this development. It's been a very frustrating journey. We've been working with Paul and his crew for many years, meeting every month on the status. And it would be nice to see some progress being made. And we think that both of these agreements might have the benefit of actually moving things forward. We think that the agreement with Safe Harbors, if it goes through, is very likely to accelerate the finalization of the work that needs to be done on the flooding problems and other aspects of the public areas. And we think that, and again, this is by hope, because there can't be any guarantees that the sale of the residential development will actually result in the proper development and completion of those works. So we are in favor of both of these, but with the caveat that there's not as many restrictive agreements that are being imposed on either of the two potential purchases to ensure that those things actually will get done in a timely fashion. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thanks for calling in.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name is Walker Seligson. My family and I are grateful recipients of the BMR program at the Strand. I hope all of you have had the pleasure of visiting the Strand, perhaps before the pandemic. Perhaps you strolled the beautiful marina or grabbed a bite at Andy's Market, but maybe you have missed during your visits is the dynamic community within the Strand development, which is growing with new families, professionals, and retirees. The Strand currently has a mixture of ethnicities, cultures, and socioeconomic backgrounds, largely because of the BMR program, which in turn has established city workers, teachers, small business owners, healthcare workers, and their families with the pride and stability of home ownership. This most likely would not be the case without the BMR program. I respectfully urge the City Council to consider the ramifications of allowing MVA to skirt their commitment to the greater good of San Rafael and the Strand community. Allowing the MBA to buy out of the remaining 6 BMRs not only sets a poor precedent that other developers will take advantage of, but it also takes scheduled and approved affordable housing away, which will further delay much needed homes for working class families in Marin. Yes, funds will be set aside in the trust, but building in Marin, as you very well know, is extremely cumbersome and slow. Mr. Guy mentioned the 190 Mills project and the rehabilitation center as possible beneficiaries of this buyout. Those two projects do not address the same need. Those address transition homeless and recovering addicts. The 6 BMRs address working class families, low and moderate income, that actually serve a much larger and greater population of need in Marin County. Currently, the Strand, as we talk, the foundations of these new homes, these possible BMR homes, literally are poured and set to go. Allowing MBA to sell out of their commitment to complete the project sends an implied message to Strand and the surrounding community. The underlying message the MBA implies is that the only way to complete this project is by selling out on the commitment to affordable housing and middle-class families. In a sense, MBA implies that they will let the development sit or walk away if they don't get a bailout. This is a real fear for many, and I hope we can avoid making a decision based on fear. The Strand should, and I hope, will be completed. I hope the city of Santa Fe stays committed to finishing the Strand with all scheduled BMRs and marina projects. MBA shouldn't get the slack and stumble around and then demand a better deal on the backs of working families. The essential workers of the day, the heroes of today, who need family housing now, not down the road, not sometime later. The balance and blend of the Strand community is something to support and build upon. Santa Fe should stay committed to supporting blended community development like the Strand. I hope you consider this perspective before making a decision. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for your comments.
Is there anyone else on the telephone line that would like to speak? If so, press *9, and I will be moving to YouTube comments. So as you know, we did receive correspondence prior to the meeting, which was published to our website as well as forwarded to the City Council. Our first comment is from Octavia Manelli. Dear City Council members, as a BMR homeowner at the Strand, I would like to respectfully urge the City Council of Santa Fe to carefully evaluate the amendment to the below market rate BMR agreement, which would permit Marina Village Associates to buy out of the remaining 6 unconstructed BMR units for the second phase of development, which the developer already committed to. I believe accepting the buyout in lieu of completion of the promised 6 BMR units would be a disservice to our community in Marin County. I can attest BMR homeownership program is life-changing and provides a profoundly positive impact on the lives of the lucky recipients. Within our community at the Strand, this program has made it possible for teachers, city workers, healthcare workers, artists, and small entrepreneurs to own a home in Marin County, which likely would not have been possible otherwise. Moreover, many of us have young children who can attend some of the best public schools that our country has to offer. Overall, the BMR homeownership program provides a foundation for families who are low, median, and moderate income within the Strand and across Marin, a stable home, a chance to build equity, and access to the American dream. The opportunity for 6 additional working-class families to obtain homeownership at the Strand is invaluable, and if the buyout is accepted, will be eliminated. I understand Marin Village Associates has offered a generous sum of $3.68 million toward the City of Santa Fe to fund its affordable housing programs. However, there is a housing crisis in Marin County, and families need homes now. I'm going to pause. Alan also provided written comments, but he was one of our phone calls, so I'm going to move on to the next comment. Paul Fordham, Homeward Bound of Marin. I want to urge the City Council to approve the Loch Lomond BMR buyout. This process will allow Santa Fe redevelopment and planning staff more flexibility to support affordable housing in appropriate areas of the City of Santa Fe. My name is Winifred Dehani, and I am a homeowner in the Strand, where I lived for 3 years. The most effective use of land and property taxes to buy out these 6 units providing full property taxes if sold at market value, generating greater revenue to provide more affordable housing units. In addition, the BMR units do not contribute to the Mello-Roos, which puts an onerous burden on the non-BMR units to fund this, as it is spread over fewer units. My name is Donna Barack Moss. We have a boat in the marina. I thought MVA was required to build the fuel dock. Did Mr. De Prima say they had only one permit to process and not build it? I'm sorry. Did Mr. De Prima say they had to permit the process and not build it? That was the final comment received through YouTube.
Okay, since that's final comment, we'll now close public input and return to council members for additional questions or observations. I heard at least two questions I'd like staff to address, if you would, please. One pertaining to the fuel dock, and then two, to expand beyond what's already been said with regard to this setting a precedence or otherwise, as I do believe. So if you could address those two, and we'll go on from there.
Certainly, I'll start with the fuel dock. It is one of a number of improvements that are included in the city approvals, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not a mandate. It is what has been entitled is the ability to put in the fuel dock. It's fully permitted by the city. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, and I've read that BCDC permit, there's no requirements in the BCDC permit that say that they must provide a fueling facility at this marina. In fact, the fueling facility portion that's unpermitted right now is the permit that's required by BCDC. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I'll be honest with you, staff has been grappling with this particular element of the marina for a long time because we were looking at ways to pull it into whether it's part of the infrastructure and to include it in the subdivision improvement agreement. We consulted with the city attorney's office, and at the end of the day, we found that we couldn't make that nexus, even though we tried very hard. So that's one thing I did want to mention about the fueling facility. The second comment about, I think Bill Carney made about avoiding us proceeding with future proposals like this until we come forward with the inclusionary housing requirements and more details on the trust fund. I can say this, we don't have any other project in the pipeline right now that has a proposal like this. This is kind of a one-off, as mentioned earlier. The buyout provision will be one of the options that is going to be presented when we bring the inclusionary housing policy forward in the next couple of months. Ethan, I don't know if you have anything else to add to this. I do know that and you might want to touch on whether or not any of the interested parties that have filed pre-applications involve workforce housing.
Yeah, so to hit on the workforce housing piece, there's two main things to kind of bring up. The first is that in a few of those pre-applications, they were looking at acquisition and rehab of existing housing. So what that would be acquiring units with existing tenants at market rate and then making them affordable with anti-displacement clauses. So essentially, if you're already living in a market rate unit that gets acquired, you wouldn't be displaced, but when you move out, it would be replaced with somebody who's a below market rate tenant. So that's one piece. The second piece regarding workforce housing overall. So as part of the January 21st report that went to council and some of our housing policies and priorities, a lot of the topics that we discuss are ways in which the city can leverage different policies that have a financial impact that would incentivize workforce housing, specifically looking at that 80% to 120% AMI. And so those are things like potentially looking at parking minimums or density bonuses. Those are things that the actions the city can take that have real tangible impacts on the ability for a developer to pencil and build housing that may not necessarily require trust fund funding. So not to say that it's not important, and being able to provide BMR housing is incredibly important, but there's lots of tools in the toolkit that we as staff are looking for and are looking at right now, and we're going to bring back to council as potential policies that may be able to allow us to better incentivize and better leverage those types of housing.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go on to other council members. Councilmember Bushy, any question or comment?
My comments are that this project has been lying dormant for far too long and needs to move forward. I wish the arrangements that have been brought forward today had a better certainty of being the impetus that we need to get this to completion. That said, I'm satisfied that the contributions to the trust fund, particularly the possibility of turning those dollars into more dollars with matching funds from other sources, is a very attractive option and is sufficient to get the BMR units completed. I will be watching very closely, because of course I'm out here, to see if this to hopefully see this project get underway. I'd be interested if anyone if Paul or if anyone else has any suggestions of how we might be able to enhance the likelihood that this will actually come to fruition. I'm thinking of maybe milestones that we could work into the schedule, or other options for incentivizing the immediate construction and immediate processing of this project. But as put forward, I think it's our best chance of getting this done, and I am prepared to vote in favor of it.
Thank you for your comment. Ask Paul if there's any response to Maribeth's valid point. Is there any way we can assure, I'll say, that this will be moved along and completed?
Well, at this point, nothing more than what we put in the report, but I can tell you this. As I've mentioned in the presentation, we've done what we can to try to incentivize the building construction through things like, for example, extending building permits that were expired or about to expire, allowing those extensions without new building permit fees, because obviously we weren't incurring any additional services to warrant that anyway, but those types of things. And we have several building permits, particularly the marina building permits, that are ready to be issued. And you know, we've done what we can to make things ready for them to be picked up. And it's really, I feel like we've done what we can.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Collin.
Yes, first I want to thank the community members that called in. Again, we're all navigating this process, and thank you to the city clerk for helping to make it happen. I speak, I think, for all the council, that we feel very strongly about production of housing units, workforce, BMR, all different types. That is why Paul Jensen and his team have looked at how do we increase that housing stock, and that process started, I think, over a year ago. And Ethan, you did mention, I believe it was in January that we had that meeting. It seems like years ago that we were talking about it. This conversation is in a larger context. And I think all of us want to have the BMR units here. We want them to be built tomorrow. And we also need to look at these really precious dollars that are coming our ways. And I'm heartened by the fact that these dollars are highly leverageable. So they're very special that way. And also the number of units that have already been built is at 13%. And one of the things that we know that staff is continuing to look at is if that 20% inclusionary, which sounds great, the way that it manifests in the real world might not be having the effect that we want. It might not be having more units. So I also concur with what Councilmember Bushy said, and I'd be prepared to support this. Obviously, if any of us had a magic wand, we would have waved it, and this would have all been completed, all the units years ago. But here we are today. We need to move forward and to complete this project. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Gamlin. Questions, comments?
Yeah, just again, thank you for the staff report. It was great. It was easy to read for myself and to understand what we're trying to get accomplished here. I echo what Vice Mayor Collin just said, that a lot of the projects that are coming across right now, we're looking at 10 to 12 to 15% inclusion in a BMR. When we approved this back in, I think it was 2004, 2007, at the 20%, that was a very admirable thing for us to do. But realistically, it appears that that might be a little bit high, and that the fact that they've already completed 13% of their units in the BMR, I think is a good thing for what we're looking at right now. So the way that we're going to be able to leverage these funds, I anticipate us being able to leverage these funds to increase the affordable housing stock that we're going to have in San Rafael. I can't think that I believe that we shouldn't be able to pass on this opportunity that we have right now. So I will be supporting the staff suggestion.
Thanks, John. Andrew McCullough, Councilman McCullough.
Yeah, I too would like to thank you, Paul, your staff, Ethan, of course, Al Cornwell, who's been standing by, and others who have worked so hard and so long on this project, and in particular, more recently, on trying to ensure that what's transpired here dovetails with the housing analysis that we've been working on, your team has been working on so closely over the last year. I too agree with the consensus that appears to have emerged here, that this makes a lot of sense to pursue. But ordinarily, I'd be loath to depart from our inclusionary housing requirements for the reasons very well stated by Bill Carney and Elaine, the resident at the Strand, and others. Unfortunately, my concern here, and I suspect it's their concern as well, even though they feel strongly that maintaining workforce housing at this site should be our priority. My concern is that what has happened over the last 12 years might persist. And even though if we didn't accept this deal, even though we have 6 units still to be built of affordable housing, they might not get built anytime soon. And it's a little bit of the bird in the hand here. If the transactions move forward and we get the funds, we know we can leverage them into additional housing elsewhere. If we don't do anything, if we disapprove this, well, we've been told by the developer that, they've proven by word and deed over the last 12 years that they're not moving forward at the present time. And they've told us that they can't move forward unless they can sell these components to other parties. So if we say no to this, then the sale doesn't go through, the BMR units lie fallow, and we don't accomplish our housing goals. So when forced to make the choice between workforce housing, transitional housing, or other opportunity housing, I say let's move forward with what's been put on the table here, even though it's not an ideal option and it doesn't achieve the other side of our goals that have been articulated this evening. It's something to move forward on. And we do pick up that segment of society that's very vulnerable and for whom we haven't had enough money in the Housing Trust Fund over the years to address their shortage of housing. So I would join with my colleagues in approving what's been put in front of us tonight.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate each of the comments. It sounds like we're in the same place. I'm in favor for 3 reasons already cited, I'll admit, but nevertheless 3, which is the receipt of the $3.6 million that we can, presumably, I know we'll all be pushing for leveraging those funds to further develop BMR type units. And it seems more likely that if we have that additional funds, we'll be able to do so. I'm convinced. I was concerned, but now I'm convinced that this will not set a precedence, because we know in the works we'll have a policy that's going to be brought before us. It'll specifically address the trade-off on units purchased. So I don't believe that this establishes a significant hurdle and by creating a precedence. And 3, like the others, I do think that it's going to expedite the development of Strand. It's sorely needed, I think, to draw a conclusion, to tidy it up and be certainly more acceptable to the immediate community as well as the entirety of San Rafael. So for those three reasons, I too am in favor of this matter. I'll ask the Mr. City Attorney if you have any concluding comments before we go to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing to add to the very thorough staff report and comments that were made. I would agree that with the comment you just made that this would not constitute a precedent. And the only other thing I would point out is that at our future Zoom meetings, I will endeavor to follow the path of the community development director and resume wearing a tie. It's very impressive.
Well, we were disappointed that you didn't tonight, but somehow we made our way through it.
Thank you.
But thank you for your comment. Appreciate it. So unless there's further comment, I'll ask for a motion regarding the first of three items under this agenda item.
I'd be happy to make a motion that we adopt the resolution authorizing the mayor and the city manager to execute the consolidated subdivision improvement agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, the matter carries 5-0. Number two.
Yeah, I move that we adopt the resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the MOU.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. And on to the third item, final item.
Yeah, finally move to adopt the resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the First Amendment to the BMR housing agreement.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. Thank you, everyone. This was an involved one, and everybody, I think, came to the right conclusion. So thank you for your effort, and certainly for the staff putting this together over a rather extended period of time. So we're very fortunate in San Rafael to have such an outstanding staff. So thank you very much. We'll now turn to council members' reports. Anyone have anything for us this evening? I see many shaking heads. And therefore, we'll move on to the successor agency consent calendar. Anyone from the public wish to address us on this item?
If you are attending via conference call, would you please press *9 if you'd like to comment on the successor agency consent calendar? I'm seeing no phone calls and no on YouTube.
Thank you very much. Comment or perhaps motion by someone.
I move approval of the acceptance of the successor agency quarterly investment report for the period ending March 31st, 2020.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Member Bushy.
Aye.
Vice Chair Collin.
Aye.
Member Gamblin.
Aye.
Member McCullough.
Aye.
Chairman Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. And we are therefore adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.